Time Rift, I have set up 4 vintage computers for people to play with and 4 vintage consoles to play with. This is one of the more popular areas of the arcade actually, but I do have 2 problems that I need to deal with that have been plaguing this area. One problem is the channel buttons on the TVs get pressed occasionally. Most of the time this just shows static, although, believe it or not, a few times they've actually locked onto a TV station and will be showing some broadcast. The first time I saw this, I was surprised to say the least because I didn't think any CRT televisions would still work since the analog TV stations are all gone. But it turns out these TVs were made in 2006 and some of the very last of their kind, and as you can see, they have SD TV tuners, so they are digital. But what's also bizarre is there's no antenna attached, so the fact that it's able to pick up a station is quite remarkable. Anyway, the problem is there's no way to change back to composite input without getting the remote control out. So this is annoying to deal with several times a day. And one other unexpected problem I've had to deal with is these mechanical shift lock keys. The shift lock keys on the keyboards get pressed from time to time, which often leaves the shift lock stuck down. Now, this can cause a number of problems. For example, on the VIC-20 with the penultimate cartridge, you need to be able to scroll up and down in the menu, but if the shift lock is pressed, you can only scroll up. On the C64, Gianna Sisters is one of the games that people play most of the time, and if you press shift lock, it works like a pause key, but people will assume the computer is locked up. The Apple II, ironically, has sort of the opposite problem. Caps Lock needs to be on for a number of games to work correctly. So as you can see here, if Caps Lock is released, then the keyboard controls no longer work. So first, let's deal with the shift lock problem. I decided to make some hardware modifications to these computers to solve these problems. The VIC-20 was probably the easiest one to fix. I basically opened it up, and the shift lock key is very easy to get to, and I just desoldered it like so. This is completely reversible later on, but for the moment, the key no longer does anything. A breadbin C64 would be just like the VIC-20, but the 64C is slightly more work. Once you get the machine taken apart, you have a couple extra screws to release the keyboard, but otherwise the concept is pretty much the same. Just desolder one of the wires on the shift lock key, like so. The Apple II is the most complicated of the bunch, as it requires taking a bunch of screws out of the bottom and eventually removing the entire top portion of the case, like so. There are 2 more screws to get the keyboard out, and instead of disconnecting the caps lock key, I'm going to do the exact opposite. I'm going to place a jumper wire here that essentially makes the caps lock on all of the time. And it's not like anybody is going to be using this computer for word processing or anything. And as you can see, these keys no longer do anything, and thus it no longer matters if kids come along and press them. Okay, so now to turn my attention back to these TVs, there's also a secondary problem I need to fix. As you can see, I screwed down bumpers to the desk in various places to keep these TVs from sliding around. And I also needed a way to keep these from tipping over because they are super front heavy, and you can actually flip it over with a single finger if you wanted to. So what I've done is I've screwed an eye bolt into the table behind each TV and used zip ties to hold it down. Now the rear tie is to keep it from flipping over, and this bottom one is to keep it from sliding forward. Well, recently somebody bumped into this TV pretty hard and it actually broke this little clip that I was using to strap it down, so I also need to fix that. So, time to take this TV apart and see what we can do inside of it. And there we go. This is about as modern as a CRT can get inside. So let's take a look at these front 2 buttons and see how they work. As you can see, when a button is pressed, it actually converts to a downward motion that presses one of these micro switches. I'm going to take the board out and see what we can do to fix this without causing any permanent damage to the controls. I'll start by unscrewing the buttons from the front bezel. It appears there's 2 separate parts here, so it'd be easy to solve this just by cutting the levers off the buttons, but again, I want to be able to reverse this mod later on. I could just leave the buttons out, but as you can see, that leaves 4 open holes where metal objects could potentially be inserted, which isn't ideal. We'll circle back to this shortly. For now, let's fix the restraint. Okay, so this is the inside of the TV bezel, and what I wanted to do is put this eye bolt in there, and so this would be sticking out, this would be sticking in, and I'm going to use this fender washer to make sure it's got a good grip on the back of the plastic so it doesn't pull through. Now, the problem is I could use the same old place that I used before, but when I looked at the actual chassis, I determined that that is where the flyback sits. So I'm going to actually just make a new hole right next to it. I'm also going to add some Loctite to the threads, so hopefully this won't come loose over time. And here we go. I'll poke that through. I'll add a bit more Loctite on this side. And now for the washer and the nut to hold it all in place. I'll tighten it up, and I think that'll be pretty secure. So here's how it looks from the outside. Okay, now back to the buttons. Kai managed to design and 3D print me some fake buttons for the front. So as you can see, here are the original buttons, and here are the fake ones I'm going to use. So I'll just slide these in there like so, and I wanted to keep the original buttons so they won't get lost. So my idea was just to zip tie them to the degaussing coil here, as anyone should be able to find these if they open the back of the TV. Now just to put it back together. So here's our eye bolt. This will likely be much stronger than the little clip that was attaching before. So I'll strap it back down, and there we go. A few days later, I completed the other 3 TVs, so now all 4 of them have fake buttons in the front. Now these buttons can be pressed, but it will no longer cause any issues. And that is all for this episode, so hope to see you in the arcade.